People born in the 1980s often grew up standing between two worlds, even if they didn't have words for it at the time. Childhood felt slower then. Phones stayed on the wall. Photos were printed and kept in boxes. News arrived once a day, not every minute. There was room for boredom, and boredom quietly taught imagination. You learned how to wait without realizing you were learning it. At the same time, change was always approaching. Computers showed up at school. The internet arrived in pieces, with strange noises and long pauses. Music moved from tapes to CDs, and to files you could suddenly carry in your pocket. Nothing shifted all at once. It crept in, gently enough that you adjusted without noticing how much adjusting you were doing. That early mix shaped something subtle. Many people from this generation learned how to adapt before they learned how to question whether adapting was tiring. You learned new systems, new rules, new expectations, and you did it quietly. Teachers said this was flexibility. Employers later called it resilience. Inside, it often felt like keeping your balance while the ground slowly tilted. There was also a strong sense of being told what success looked like. Finish school, get a stable job, buy a home, stay loyal, be patient. The promise was that effort would be rewarded in a clear, steady way. For a while, that promise felt believable. Then the world shifted faster. Jobs became temporary. Costs rose. Security felt thinner. Many people didn't feel angry so much as confused, like following a map that no longer matched the road. This confusion didn't always show on the surface. People born in the 80s often learned to appear composed. They knew how to show up on time, do what was asked, and keep moving. Inside, there was often a quiet question forming, not loud enough to demand answers, but steady enough to never fully go away. There's a certain relationship to time that comes from this. You remember life before constant connection, so silence doesn't scare you. But you also live inside nonstop noise now, so rest can feel strangely earned, not natural. Even moments of doing nothing can carry a low hum of guilt, as if you should be optimizing them somehow. Many learned early to be self-reliant, not because no one cared, but because independence was valued. You were trusted to figure things out. That trust built competence, but it also taught you to carry things alone. Asking for help can still feel heavier than it needs to be. If you listen closely, you can hear this generation thinking in layers. One part remembers simplicity. Another part manages complexity. They don't always agree. That quiet tension shows up in small moments, like standing in a grocery store comparing prices, or hesitating before sending a message, or pausing late at night wondering when life started feeling this full and this fragile at the same time. As adulthood settled in, many people born in the 80s began to notice a quiet shift in how effort felt. Working hard was familiar. You had been doing that for years. What felt different was how unclear the payoff became. You could do everything reasonably well and still feel like you were standing in place, watching the scenery change without you. This didn't always lead to frustration in an obvious way. Often it showed up as tiredness that sleep didn't fully fix, or a sense of always preparing for something that never quite arrived. Life felt busy, but not always meaningful. Full, but not always satisfying. You learned to manage that feeling by staying practical, by focusing on what was in front of you. There is a carefulness in this generation. Not fear, exactly, but awareness. You saw systems fail. You watched people who did everything right struggle anyway. That teaches you to plan, but also to lower expectations quietly, so disappointment won't hurt as much if it comes. This isn't pessimism. It's a form of emotional budgeting. Relationships were shaped by this too. Many learned to value loyalty and depth, but also independence. You want connection, but you don't want to burden anyone. You listen well. You show up. At the same time, you may hold parts of yourself back, unsure where they would land if fully shared. It's easier to be steady than vulnerable. Technology played a role here. You remember calling someone's house and hoping they were home. Now you can reach anyone instantly, yet replies feel heavier. Messages linger. Silence feels louder. People born in the 80s often sit between wanting closeness and needing space, unsure how much is enough of either. There's also a relationship with identity that feels unfinished. You were told you could be many things, but also that you needed to choose something and stick with it. As the world changed, those choices became less permanent. Careers shifted. Interests evolved. Some people felt behind, even while moving forward. It's a strange sensation, like walking while checking over your shoulder. Many learn to be emotionally observant. You notice moods. You read rooms. This can make you considerate, but it can also make you tired. You may feel responsible for keeping things smooth, even when no one asked you to. Letting things be messy can feel uncomfortable, even when it's harmless. Still, there is a quiet strength here. Not the loud kind that announces itself, but the kind that keeps going. The kind that adapts without erasing itself completely. People born in the 80s often carry stories inside them that don't need to be told all at once. They unfold slowly in small choices, in how they care for others, in how they try to make sense of a world that changed speed while they were learning how to live in it. And sometimes, in the middle of an ordinary day, there's a pause. A moment where you notice your breath, where you realize you've been holding more than you thought. That moment doesn't need fixing. It just needs space. Over time, many people born in the 80s developed a quiet relationship with responsibility. It didn't arrive suddenly. It layered itself on. Caring for work, for family, for aging parents, for children, or simply for staying afloat. Responsibility became less of a role and more of a background hum, always present, rarely acknowledged. This can shape how rest is experienced. Rest doesn't always feel like release. Sometimes it feels like a pause between tasks. Even during calm moments, part of the mind stays alert, gently scanning for what comes next. This isn't because something is wrong. It's because awareness became a habit. You learned early that stability could shift, so you stayed ready. There's also a subtle sense of comparison that lingers. You remember milestones being talked about in clear terms. By this age, you should be here. You should have this. When life doesn't line up cleanly with those timelines, it can create a quiet questioning. Not envy exactly, but a wondering about whether you missed something important, or if the measuring stick itself changed. People born in the 80s often hold mixed feelings about ambition. You care about doing well, but you've seen how chasing more doesn't always lead to peace. You want enough. Enough money, enough time, enough energy. Defining what enough means becomes a personal task, not something handed down. There is a gentleness in how this generation often approaches others. You understand that everyone is carrying unseen weight. You've carried it yourself. This makes you patient, sometimes to your own cost. You may excuse behavior, smooth over tension, or stay quiet to keep things balanced. It feels natural, even when it's tiring. At the same time, there's a growing awareness of limits. Not in a dramatic way, but in small realizations. That you can't be available all the time. That saying yes has a cost. That your energy is not endless. Learning this doesn't feel like empowerment. It feels like acceptance. Memory plays a strong role here. Songs, smells, old shows, familiar places can bring a sudden softness. Not because the past was perfect, but because it felt simpler to understand. Nostalgia becomes less about wanting to go back and more about wanting that clarity again, even briefly. People from this generation often carry a deep respect for effort. You know how much work goes into small achievements. You don't dismiss progress just because it isn't flashy. You value consistency, showing up, keeping promises. These values aren't loud, but they shape daily life in steady ways. As the years move on, there's a quiet shift toward listening inward more closely. Not to chase happiness, but to notice strain before it hardens. To recognize when something feels off, even if you can't explain why. These moments of noticing matter. They don't demand action right away. They simply ask for attention. And in that attention, there is room. A small, steady space where breath slows, shoulders drop, and the sense of carrying everything alone softens. Just a little. Somewhere along the way, priorities begin to rearrange themselves without asking permission. What once felt urgent starts to feel optional. What once felt impressive starts to feel heavy. People born in the 80s often notice this shift not through big decisions, but through quiet preferences. Choosing rest over noise. Choosing familiar over impressive. Choosing what feels steady over what looks successful. This is often when the idea of meaning becomes more grounded. Meaning is no longer something to search for aggressively. It appears in ordinary reliability. In showing up when you said you would. In doing a job with care, even if no one is watching. In small acts that don't get recorded or shared. There is comfort in that kind of invisibility. Emotional life takes on a softer texture here. Feelings are still felt deeply, but they move more slowly. There's less urgency to label them or fix them. Sadness can sit beside gratitude. Contentment can exist alongside restlessness. These combinations no longer feel confusing. They feel accurate. People from this generation often become careful with their energy. Not protective in a rigid way, but selective. You start noticing which conversations leave you calmer and which ones quietly drain you. Which environments allow your thoughts to breathe and which ones tighten your chest. Adjustments happen gently. You don't announce them. You just stop forcing yourself into places that don't fit anymore. There's also a growing respect for limits. Physical limits, emotional limits, time limits. You begin to understand that saying yes to everything slowly turns life into a series of obligations. Saying no, even quietly, becomes a way of staying present for what matters most. This isn't about control, it's about care. Relationships reflect this shift. Depth becomes more important than frequency. Some connections fade without conflict, simply because they belong to a different season. Others remain, strengthened by shared history and mutual understanding. Being able to sit together without filling the silence starts to feel like a gift. Hope changes shape too. It becomes less about outcomes and more about atmosphere. Hoping for calm, hoping for health, hoping for days that feel manageable. This kind of hope is quieter, but more durable. It doesn't rise high, but it doesn't collapse easily either. The body begins to speak more clearly. Fatigue is noticed sooner. Tension gets named. Rest is no longer something earned after exhaustion, but something respected before it. This listening isn't dramatic. It's practical. The body becomes a guide rather than an obstacle. What slowly forms is a sense of internal permission. Permission to live at a pace that matches your nervous system. Permission to define success in private ways. Permission to let life be simpler than it was promised to be. These permissions don't arrive all at once. They appear in moments, while making coffee, while walking home, while lying awake and realizing you no longer want what you once chased. And in that realization, there is no loss. Just a quiet alignment settling in. At this stage, life often feels less like a straight path and more like a rhythm you recognize. You wake up already aware of your patterns. What drains you? What steadies you? People born in the 80s tend to move through days with this quiet familiarity, adjusting slightly rather than trying to reinvent everything. The past no longer feels like something to measure yourself against. It feels more like a reference point. You don't ask if things were better back then. You notice how they were different. That difference helps you understand yourself, not judge yourself. Memory becomes a companion, not a comparison. There is an ease with emotional complexity now. You don't rush to sort feelings into clean categories. You let them overlap. Gratitude can sit next to grief. Contentment can exist beside wanting more. These combinations don't cancel each other out. They simply reflect a fuller picture. Work and responsibility take on a quieter tone. You still care about doing things well, but you no longer confuse effort with worth. You notice when you've done enough. You give yourself permission to stop pushing once the task is complete. This shift isn't dramatic. It's practical, and it saves energy. People from this generation often become good at holding space. You know when to speak and when to stay quiet. You've learned that not every moment needs advice. Sometimes presence is enough. Sometimes understanding shows up best as patience. The future is approached with realism, not fear. You plan where you can. You leave room where you must. There's an understanding now that certainty was never guaranteed, even when it felt promised. This awareness doesn't harden you. It steadies you. Joy becomes smaller and more reliable. It shows up in routines that feel gentle, in laughter that doesn't need an audience, in moments where nothing needs improving. These experiences don't ask for attention. They simply exist. There is also a softening toward yourself. You recognize the weight you've carried, often without naming it. You stop asking why things took time. You understand that they needed to. That understanding brings relief, not regret. Living like this doesn't feel like settling. It feels like alignment. A quiet agreement between who you are and how you live. Less explanation. Less resistance. More ease in being exactly where you are.